Good day. This is Richard Westler, and this is Caring in America, the podcast for caregivers and care recipients. And folks, most of you that have been with me a while now know my story. 20 years ago, minding my own business in the software industry, married later, 2 small kids, and my wife and I have all 4 parents with us. We think they're doing great, and we find out they're doing pretty poorly. So we wind up on that care train, taking care of them for 14 years until the final parent passes at 96. I, since then, have been doing, in addition to taking care of them, a lot of education locally where I was in California, across the nation, about what it means to age and what it means to need care. Started this podcast about 2.5 years ago, and now acting as the CEO of a Plan to Age, our national foundation, where we're really trying to continue to educate America about this crazy thing that most of us are dealing with as we age, which is a good thing. And then the good possibility that a lot of us are going to need care. We have a special guest with us, Paul Kidwell. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Mission. How are you?
Where are you physically sitting, sir?
I am based in Boston. I have been living in Boston, oh, goodness gracious, over 30 years now. Went to school here and left for a nanosecond and then came back like so many people who experienced Boston as a student and started my career in communications.
Sure. So what's the weather like today for you in Boston?
Well, we have been abruptly reintroduced, I should say, to fall. Only a couple of weeks ago, we were in the low 70s, a little bit of a lovely spring breeze, late summer breeze, if you will. And then now we are knee deep in the 40s and 50s, and even in the 30s during the evening, with rain and freezing rain and snow to follow on the horizon.
Wow. Sounds similar to where I am outside of Boise. We haven't had any snow yet. A decent amount of rain, and even dipped down into the high 20s so far in the morning. So give our listeners some background. Who is Paul? What's Paul been doing? And then eventually, how did you get to the podcast that you're doing?
Sure, no, I would be happy to, Richard. As I said, went to school at Boston University many, many years ago and started my communications career here in Boston. Like you, kind of working in the tech space for a while, and then I always used to say I was snake bit by an acquisition, or I could relocate to California where the acquiring company was located and reapply for my job, which I've never understood. But nonetheless, I decided to stay and was waiting for the next best thing to come along, which I realized was me. And so I ventured out as an independent contractor. And at the same time, the life science or the biotech industry, as it was called then, pardon me, was really starting to emerge. There were a handful of companies coming out of the MIT and Harvard and Boston University labs, startups that had identified certain molecules they felt had potential as medicines and various indications. And so, armed with a little bit of seed money, they started this biotech industry, as I said it was called. And I had no experience as a scientist, no background in science, but as an individual and as a person, I've always been drawn to the things that I had no experience in. And much like when I delved into technology in the early parts of my career. So I kind of nosed around some of the people who were in these small startup companies. They were doing a little bit of communications. Most of it was around trying to attract investors. Of course, these companies were really in the early startup phase and needed development money for their programs. But nobody was really doing public relations and media, which was my expertise.
Right.
And so I kind of talked my way into a position with a PR firm that was actually, it was an investor relations firm that was supporting some of these biotech companies. And as I said, talked my way into it, saying that if you want to attract investors, they need to read about you in various publications, particularly the business publications. Here we were in Boston and said, the Boston Globe and, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Fortune, Forbes, Business Week. Back then, there were all these flourishing magazines covering the business in the United States. And the biotech industry was new. And so they were interested in learning more about it. So anyhow, this PR firm hired me and kind of made me head of their media department, which is N of 1 at that time. And I stayed there for a couple of years, and we had acquired a number of clients during that time. And as I was matriculating along, one of the clients offered me an internal position, which I accepted. 2 years later, again, another snake bite, they got acquired and by a company and similar situation. So I really thought the next best thing really is going to be me. And so that's when I ventured out as an independent, focused primarily on media relations, taking stories from these companies around their science, around their business, around their leadership, wherever I felt there was a story, I knew I could pitch and sell it to a reporter at various publications. And that was about 27 years ago. And I haven't looked back. And really, it was sort of caught up in the biotech wave a few years ago, where this industry really has grown. Now there's literally over 1,000 companies in the greater Boston, Cambridge area that are focused on what we now call life sciences, and that would include medical technology, products, as well as drug developers. So I've been very fortunate to be in one of the industries that has been very solvent over the past almost 3 decades for me. About 10 years into that career, my wife and I had been married for a while, started experiencing very visible leg shade, particularly at night when we'd be watching television or sitting at the dinner table. I would notice, and it was mostly in her leg, not in her upper extremities. And I thought, well, she was a corporate accountant, and I know that's clearly a very demanding position. And so she, like me, had some very long days, long and tiring days. So I figured it was just fatigue setting in. But these symptoms persisted, and to the point where we need to get these checked out. I mean, neither of us, again, had any kind of medical training or wherewithal. So I figured, and we were in the heart of the world's largest medical center here in Boston, with the availability of the best and brightest. So we went to one of the major hospitals here and met with a neurologist who's actually the head of they call it the movement disorders team. And he diagnosed her with having early stage Parkinson's. And she was only in her mid-40s at the time. So that was really, really early. Someone to be diagnosed. If we all many of us think of Parkinson's as something that is contracted by somebody who's perhaps my age at this point. But anyhow, she was diagnosed, and that absolutely floored us. Here this woman who was healthy, didn't smoke, didn't drink, exercised religiously, great lifestyle, and yet she was just, and there's no family history either on her side of the family, nor in mine. So she was beset with this diagnosis, and the more that I learned about it, and the more we learned about it, the scarier it got. Parkinson's being a progressive illness for which there is no cure. They have medication, particularly in the early stages, I would say in the first 8 to 10 years of its onset, that do a very good job of masking the symptoms and helping you live a quote, normal life while the disease continues to progress. And that was the case with my wife. I mean, she worked and we carried on a nice family life and did the things that everybody does, and bought our first home, and went on trips. And she was from China, so she introduced me to trips to Asia, which was always fascinating for me. And then about 10 years into her illness, I think the medicine started to be less effective, and the symptoms were visible, not more frequently, but also in a greater capacity, if you will. And there's a term in the Parkinson's realm called frozen gate, and that sometimes will happen to Parkinson's, particularly as patients, as I said, become more advanced with the illness. And there were times where I literally would have to rescue her from work, where she kind of stopped in her tracks. And of course, she didn't want to share this with her fellow employees. But now it was pretty clear that she was, suffering from the ill effects of this disease advancement. So about, 2014, we had a discussion where she decided it was best if she no longer, worked. So she went into early retirement. Because of her illness, she could qualify for disability, but she gave up this wonderful career. She had a wonderful career going about 20 years as a corporate accountant, with many fruitful years ahead of us. And so that was devastating for her as well as for me as her spouse and primary caregiver. And so she remained at home. And then around 2 years later, one of the crueler cuts of some of these Parkinson's medications is about 50% of those taking them will develop some form of dementia. And that's exactly what happened to her. It started 6 or 7 years ago with hallucinations, delusions, which I was made aware of the potential for this during one of the quarterly neurology meetings, but still didn't know how to handle it. And so when she first started saying that she saw children in the backyard or dogs in the neighbor's porch or what have you, I would just no, they're not. They're not there, honey. They're not there. You don't know what you're seeing. And instead of just sort of going along with her, knowing that these were fairly typical of someone who had this disease background, for someone who was taking these medications. So the delusions and hallucinations led to more aggressive, agitated spells as the years progressed. And she would exhibit that in actual physical agitation towards me, outbursts of crying, who could last anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, being very anxious and scared. And a couple of times she called 911 because she was scared of, she called them on me, actually, saying that I was trying to do her harm. And so, and of course, the police were very understanding of that and actually told me to call the local precinct in our district and tell them my story and kind of register, if you will, for lack of a better term. So if there are calls in the future, they still have to respond to them, but the background is there as they pursue this cause. So that was really, really harrowing for me as her spouse to have to sit at home. Again, I was working at home, so I was always there with her and see not only her physical decline, but also her cognitive decline. And here again, this very bright, college-educated, was wonderful with numbers, and not really no longer had that capacity. And about 3 years ago, as her physical conditions declined even worse, she lost the ability to walk, and so was in a wheelchair at home. To make matters worse, she also had severe osteoarthritis, which hampered her ability to not only walk, but certainly grasp things in her hands, things of that nature. So towards, the last year and a half of our lives, her life, I was feeding her, bathing her, dressing her. I did have some help who would come in the mornings, but that was only for 4 hours each day. And so the rest of the day it was up to me because she wasn't walking. She no longer could walk and was in a wheelchair 24 hours a day. That meant transferring her from the chair onto the toilet, onto the bed, back into the chair, which has taken its toll on me physically. So I was doing that for about 3 years. And sadly, she passed away in August. And Parkinson's patients don't die from the illness. They'll always die from some contributing factor. A lot of times they will aspirate or choke. They lose the ability to swallow. And I was really scared about that happening to her and what I would do if I was privy to that at home. But hers was a very peaceful passing. She died of sort of natural causes / heart failure, as I said, in late August. And now I am in the throes of dealing with grief, missing her, and the excruciating pain, unlike I've ever experienced in my life, of not having her around.
That is, wow, it's hard to react. I mean, that's an unbelievable story, Paul. And I feel so much for what you've gone through and what you're continuing to go through. For our audience, Paul and I have talked before this episode and knew the journey he was going through. And it's amazing and horrific. And the fact that so many of us wind up with very challenging diseases like this. And then, as you said, the complications that come with that, including complications from medication, etc. Your podcast, tell the audience a little bit about that, what it's called, and what you're trying to achieve with the podcast.
Sure. Well, being a caregiver for 18 years, and you know this as well as I do, Richard, you begin to identify yourself as caregiver first, and everything else trails behind in second and third place. And so, and of course, being involved professionally in the biomedical field, I realized the importance of the patient stories to affect drug development and development, life-changing medicines. And was actually, I actually developed some of those stories during my career, many, many times with various companies. And through that experience, I got to know not only the patients, but usually their caregivers as well, because caregivers, particularly with progressive and perhaps even a fatal illness, they are attached to the hip with the patient. And and I felt with relying on patients for information to help drug developers, we are missing the opportunity to also gather the information from caregivers who are as close as anybody to the patient, including clinicians and nurses and doctors. I had such a wealth of information on from my wife's experience with Parkinson's that I was happy to share it. So anyhow, about little over 2 years ago, I was again in the throes of being a caregiver first. Had this idea, being a communication professional and also an avid listener of podcasts, I realized that there was room for what I felt was, at least initially, was going to be a focus on men, male caregivers. We as men are loath to tell our stories, right? Because of cultural we're just guys. We just do, and we don't necessarily want to relate what we're going through emotionally. So I looked around and I felt, well, there's a few out there, but I thought there's always room for one more. And so I came up with the title "In Sickness." So we're playing on the merit vows in sickness and in health. It's called "In Sickness: Men and the Culture of Caregiving." And again, the initial focus was going to be solely on men. But then I did a little bit of focus group with some friends, particularly female colleagues, who liked the notion that we were amplifying the male voices.
Right.
Then, however, and of course, I knew this as well as anybody because I was the one who's developed these stories professionally. And my co-host Bob Coughlin and I, we always say that we as men caregivers are standing on the shoulders of giants. The women caregivers who have preceded us. So I thought, well, we can't not tell the female caregiver story if we want to do this justice. And so we kept the title because it's still, this podcast is seen through the eyes of two male hosts and producers. So we're still through that culture of caregiving through men, but we open it up to both men and women, and without even trying, it kind of works out to be about 50-50 split. We have focused on a varying group of topics. We focused on a lot of particular disease areas. My co-host Bob Coughlin is the former president and CEO of Massachusetts Biotechnology Organization. So and the fact that he and I both have nearly 50 years of experience in this industry, we have a great many contacts. So we know most of the companies, a large portion of companies who are developing drugs in various therapeutic areas. So we will call upon them to participate in our podcast. And we've done breast cancer. We're actually doing one in November on prostate cancer. We've done one on cystic fibrosis. We did one on male breast cancer, which was very intriguing. We've done our caregiver burnout. We did one recently on the sandwich caregivers, those caregivers who are caring for an elderly parent and a younger child, perhaps. We actually, one of my favorite ones last year, we did one on caregivers who are actually service dogs. And although we couldn't get our service dog Sawyer, who was a 12-year-old golden retriever, to actually talk with us, he did offer ARP, which we use in the introduction, which I thought was kind of clever. But we did. He was a caregiving dog for a couple in Western Michigan, and the wife had MS for a great many years, and they were employing Sawyer as their husband's right hand, if you will. So it's kind of a soup to nuts approach, focusing both on male and female caregivers. We do an awful lot on rare disease. It's been very well received. I can't get over the wonderful comments we get from our audience on each episode. We've been doing it for about a year and a half now. It's a multi-podcast. And again, it's called Sickness, Men and the Culture of Caregiving. You can preview or review, I should say, past episodes. insickness.org is our URL. And then in addition, through that exposure, and interestingly enough, and because I have a professional background largely focused in the rare disease area, a publication in the UK called Rare Revolution magazine, by its title, suggests that they also focus on rare diseases. They approached me and asked me to contribute a bi-monthly column on caregiving, specifically directed at the rare disease area. So I've kind of developed this persona and identity as a caregiver in this industry, and I guess I can't think of a better way to spend my time. It's a way to not only, I think, share ideas and contribute to other people's lives, but also in a small way, I think I'm honoring my wife by continuing to amplify not just the male caregiver voice, but caregiving in general. I mean, there's 63 million of us in the U.S. And one of the more harrowing figures that I've read from ARP magazine is that we are responsible for over $60 billion of unpaid care each year.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And I'm fully aware of that because 2 years ago, when my wife's health really started to decline, I realized that even with the modest amount of help I was getting in the mornings, I was ill-suited to carrying on my professional career the way I had known it. So I started to pull away, and for the past 2 years, I really haven't done much in the area of my former profession. I've been focused on her care as well as by serendipity, these two other opportunities to share the caregiving loss.
I mean, this is, first of all, folks, I mean, Paul's story is amazing. What he's gone through, what his wife went through, what he's doing with the podcast is fantastic as well. We talk a lot about the latest AREP report that Paul has probably seen talks about 61% of caregivers being women. But obviously, there's a lot of caregivers out there that are men, including myself, including Paul. And it's something, guys, we have to stand up and do. And, as we get ready to wrap up, just again, folks, and I talk about this all the time, what we're doing with the Plan to Age, which your number is the number 2, plantoage.org, really trying to help people understand why it's so important to plan, kind of what Paul was just talking about. I mean, 95% of us, that's a big number. 95% of us are not going to be able to afford care, whether it's moving someone to a senior living community, if they'll move, or whether it's bringing someone in for quite a few hours during the day into their home or your home to take care of. And what that means in reality, like myself, like Paul, like my family, it's going to fall on us. And it can be talked about this. It can be a couple weeks. It can be many years like we did, many more years like Paul did. I mean, that is reality. And what I'm trying to do is just encourage people to understand if you have loved ones in your life, especially loved ones who are a little bit older, if you have a spouse, if you have a partner similar age, maybe even younger, things happen. And it can be a long journey like we went through and Paul went through. And I'm really trying to encourage people to understand, yeah, it's a tough thing to talk about and think about, but we need to, because if and when it happens, I tell people it'll never be easier, but having a plan in place makes it easier. It'll never be easy, but it makes it easier.
Well, what I find interesting, Richard, is we are always encouraged to save for the future. And everybody who goes into a professional setting has an opportunity to contribute to 401ks and things, investment opportunities like that. I think in parallel, at least that should be part of the discussion that, I mean, because one of the episodes we did was on caregivers who are younger than 25 years old, which is a large portion of them. So it's never really, I mean, and you also said at the beginning of the recording was the fact that your own caregiving experience came without notice, as it always does. Nobody is preparing for it. Nobody can say, okay, when somebody turns 30 or 40 or 50, this is going to happen. And so we need to be prepared. It's going to happen. Something is going to happen. And whether you are the person who is receiving the care or whether you are the person offering the care, some kind of advanced preparation needs to be done.
That's great advice, Paul. And folks, please share this episode. As I always encourage you to do that with friends, neighbors, coworkers, folks at church, whatever it may be. I mean, Paul's story, riveting and something that people need to hear. And again, his last words there, we need to really plan. We need to understand. I tell people, the long-term care insurance industry, and I've said this over and over again, says about 70% of us are going to need care. To me, that's baloney. I think Paul agrees with that. I go more 95%. I talked to someone a week or so ago, and she was saying 100%. It's almost all of us that are going to need some form of care. So, like Paul said, we'll contribute money to retirement funds, we'll plan vacations, we'll do all these things. But think about what Paul's talking about, what I'm talking about, and trying to get ahead of something in your life that is most likely going to happen. And tough way to end this, but it's reality. And Paul, I want to thank you. I want to thank you. I wish you all the best moving forward. We will stay in touch. Any parting words, sir?
No, I certainly thank you, but I think I just want to echo your sentiments, Richard. The fact that this is going to happen to somewhere within your family, and we all love is what directs us as caregivers.
Yeah.
And so we want that love to be something that is very easy to give and not sort of in fear of something calamitous happen. So I think the preparation can't come early enough.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, folks. And until we talk again, have yourself an awesome day.